All right, guys, so I wanted to talk a little bit about coolant filters. You don't see coolant filters a lot on pickup truck applications or the light duty stuff, but in the industrial and heavy duty world, you do see coolant filters on pretty much everything. I know working in the industrial side of things on B-Series Cummins, in trucks and equipment and generators, you lots of times will see coolant filter on them. Two different types of coolant filters that I've used. I think there's like 4 or 5 different types, but anyways, the two that we're going to talk about is a non-treated filter and then a treated filter. There's more than one treated filter.
Just give a quick little rundown.
The ones that I use are
the BTA, what they classify as a balanced treatment additive, which is basically the same thing as an SCA, which is just the supplement that they add into it. It's just Baldwin that calls it a BTA plus. So hopefully that clarifies a little bit for you guys. On with the show.
But I wanted to just talk a little bit about it. So when you guys get contaminants in your cooling system, like plug up heater cores, plug up rads, any type of cooling system plug, most of the time that's because the system isn't, 1, being flushed, 2, being taken care of. And that's the filter's job. Now, no different than a transmission, no different than an engine oil. If you don't have a filter there, it loads up with garbage, right? And especially coolant, because most people will put coolant in, long life coolant, which I don't like, another story. That when you run that long life coolant, over a certain time you need to add additives to it. It actually doesn't need to be checked. So when you run a filter, if you run a treated filter, that will add that back into the filter. So what I do is I'll run a treated filter sometimes, and then I'll run an untreated filter sometimes. Depending on the filter that you're running, sizes, there's a bunch of different sizes and stuff. I'll give you some part numbers. If you want to try some out, I'll give you some part numbers. The part numbers will be in the description. But you can get different lengths too. This is a little bit longer one. You can get a shorter one, so you can get it into tighter spots. And then there's more than one filter housing. This is just the filter housing that I happen to have. And then there's another one, which I think probably I'll use the other style one on the International. We'll put the International together. So you'll be able to see. The Internationals get lots of miles, so I want to have a coolant filter. I may even actually do a larger coolant filter on it, just because the system will hold more coolant. So that's basically how they base off of, is how much coolant will that system hold, and that's how big the filter is supposed to be. Now this filter is good for 1 to 6 gallons. No, sorry, I think this one's actually more than that. I think it's 2 to 6 gallons, or 2 to 8 gallons, I think. And then the other, this little smaller one, is 1 to 6. So either of those filters are just fine. You can run a bigger one. It doesn't hurt anything. It's just that if you have treatment in it, you want to be careful, because you can put too much additive into the system. So that's the reason I recommend to test it. You should be testing your coolant. If you're not testing your coolant, you should be. Not just for it to freeze, you need to just check it for whether it's out of additive. So usually what I do when I'm running a coolant filter, I haven't had a coolant filter on this truck for quite a few years. When I had one on there all the time, what I would do is I would run 1 year without a treated one, and then the next year, if I hadn't changed the coolant, I tend to take this truck apart a lot, so you don't have to put additive to it if you change the coolant all the time. It's because I had the truck apart, obviously. As you can just run, you're gonna be back on track here. You can run just a regular filter, no additive. So I would run that for a year, and then I would run a treated one for a year, and then go back to the non-treated one. So it's super easy. They're not really complicated to set up. You can buy kits for different trucks. The kits are relatively expensive compared to, like this housing. You can buy between 40 and 50 bucks. The filters, depending on which filter, what brand you're buying, they're $25 to $40. Pretty cheap, really, when it comes down to it. And then that's going to keep the contaminants out of the system. So, like I said, plugging up heater cores. Any of you guys that have had a heater core plugged up in your truck, if you ran a coolant filter, or if you put a new heater core in the truck and you don't want it to plug up, if you run a coolant filter, you'll never have that problem, because now you're treating the fluid as you're supposed to. So just, right, one of those things. So super easy to hook up these things. I'm going to show you on a 12 valve, obviously, because we're looking at a 12 valve. But you can do it to a common rail as well. There's ports you can do it on. It's pretty simple. Just as simple as doing it on a common rail it is a 12 valve. But basically what I'm going to do is you have your steam port, which is right here. There is now on this setup, there is on this one, there is a valve in there. You need to take that valve out if you're going to do it. I'm actually going to run AN line, so I'm actually going to take this out, and then it'll be an AN line that comes out of there. But you're going to come out. You need to come out of there. You need to go into your filter wherever you mount your filter, and it does have arrows on it. So you're in and then out, or out, depending on which way you're going. And obviously this needs to be mounted somewhere. You can mount this anywhere because your coolant is going to flow through this, right? And then on the 12 valve, the easiest way to do is, well, usually if you don't have a coolant bypass, this won't be there, right? But this is, so you would plumb it into here. Now I've drilled and tapped another hole right there in that boss so that it will feed back into that. And there again, I've decided I'm going to put the coolant filter back on. So we're going to have the coolant filter. So it's just going to come out of here and go back into here, goes back into the rad hose. So it's kind of like, I guess really it's kind of like a bypass oil filter in theory. You don't need to flow crazy amount of fluid through it. Like you even could on your bypass or on your coolant bypass, if you have your coolant bypass set up like I have mine, you really could even just run that hose right into this and then through. Adds a restriction to that system. That's the reason I'm not doing it that way. But you know, there's lots of ways to hook it up. If you're doing a common rail, you can come out of the back of the head or out of the side of the head. There's a bunch of holes, and then you can feed it back into your bottom rad hose. You can feed it back into your top rad hose. There's lots of different places you can feed it. Pretty easy to set up. Next one I do on a common rail, which I don't work on many trucks anymore other than my own, you know, I can show you guys how to do it. But I'm sure now that I'm going to do a video on this, probably somebody will ask me to do it, so I'll, you know, help them out and I'll video it. But I wanted to talk about that. I think that it's a good idea. Do you need it? Absolutely not. You do not have to run it. But if Cummins didn't think it was a good idea, why would they put it on an industrial? The reason they didn't put it on these things was they were trying to make them as simple as possible, and most people wouldn't change it anyway. Even on big trucks, man, I've seen trucks that are, you know, 4 or 5 years old, and 4 or 5 year old big truck is being used properly. It's got some miles on it. You know, you should be, you know, I would say at least 300,000-400,000 miles on that truck. Miles, not kilometers. You know, if it's been used for a few years, like that's not even that many miles. 300,000-400,000 miles in 4 years. That's only 100,000 miles. Probably like 600,000 miles in 4 years. Depends on how the truck's being used, obviously. I've seen trucks with 500,000 kilometers on them, which would be 375,000 miles, let's say, with the original coolant filter on it. Like, still have factory paint on it. So just lack of maintenance. The guys that are working on the trucks don't know what they're doing. The filters aren't that expensive. So, you know, any filter that you have that you're running, and you should be changing it. Just my thought. Do what you want. Doesn't matter to me. But I will be running a cool filter on this truck. We will be putting one on the International when we start working on the International. The play trucks, I don't usually put them on those just because I dump the coolant out of them all the time. Like the first gen or the shorty or something like that. I'm going to do a dump and fill every year at a minimum on it. And even on this thing, I usually, all of my vehicles, I'll do a dump and fill. But I like to try to keep the system as clean as possible. So I'm going to be running this filter, which is a non-treated filter. It's just a filter on this truck, and we'll try to keep that system clean. So if you guys have any questions about it, let me know. Like I said, I will put the part numbers for these. If I can't find links for them, I'll still add the part numbers in there for you guys, just so that you can find part numbers. So like, subscribe, hit me down in the comments, and remember, it's not rocket science.